situation with the loss of one's son, children, especially the sons and daughters are closer to mum and dad virtually more than anyone else. And how do we deal with something like that when we get emotionally overwhelmed with like a life-changing loss? The Buddhist people are able to deal with the loss of a family member much more easily than many Western people. Some Western people, even 10 years later, they're still suffering over the loss of a son and a daughter. These things are understandable, but only from the monk's perspective, that if you're still in incredible emotional pain even after 12 months, it's something that definitely the monks would not want to see. A person, essentially, there's something continuing on into the future, because with the whole nature of the Buddhist teaching, the Buddhist path is any Buddhist person who keeps the 5 precepts has an underlying understanding that you keep the 5 precepts from a wisdom-based perspective, because you look at the nature of life, you look at what goes on around you, what happens to family and friends, what happens to people with maybe too much power, authority, too much wealth, some of the very tricky, dodgy stuff they can get up to, and you just look at what people do, and you look at the course of their lives, the direction that they go in, the things that happen to them. So this is why anyone who keeps the 5 precepts, it's a wisdom-based principle. So right from the beginner's level right through to advanced, it's wisdom and insight all the way from start to finish. And that principle will still apply when we have these very heavy family and personal losses, that it's perfectly natural to feel a sense of grief and loss and separation. Even I had that it took me about 12 months. So even for the monks, you just can't drop people that easily. Because when you lose the parent or you lose the child, you know exactly where you stand, where the relationship stands. You know exactly how you feel about your son, your daughter, about mum and dad when you lose them. Because sometimes we can be a little bit casual. Sometimes we can take people for granted, but when you have that complete separation, then you know exactly emotionally how you feel about the person that you've lost. So how do we deal with this? We have this life-changing event. How am I going to perceive this kind of experience? So naturally, it's I would always encourage people to grieve, and to if they want to cry, they can cry as much as they feel is completely suitable for them on the heart level, and to feel the grief and the pain and the sorrow is perfectly acceptable. But every single one of us, you have to make sure that with the emotional, with those very, very strong emotions that you are going through, that you've got to keep your wisdom and insight in check with those feelings. So every major feeling that you go through, you need to have an understanding of where it's coming from and why and where, time and place, with one's child, with mum and dad. So you have the child at the center of your life. You have these very, very strong feelings connected with your child. And as we go through, with every strong emotion that you have, to minimize the level of emotional pain that you go through, you need to understand, you have that feeling, that very strong feeling in the center, and you need to understand everything about that feeling, because this is something the monks go through all the time. When we run into difficulties, if I don't have an ability to let things go, if I can't bring things to peace, that means my insight is basically, it's not established. This is the test. All of us have stuff to deal with in life. We have these very heavy situations currently, and we have garden variety stuff through the course of one's life, 20, 30, 40 years at least. But the key principle is, because the Buddhist path is a wisdom-based path, every single thing we go through, from the absolute most intense to very very light, very light things, like the way flowers grow in the garden, and the birds and the insects and their the nature, when they come visit your your back garden, and some people are very interested in natural things, but the bottom line is that anything significant in one's life, the full range from start to finish. One really needs to develop one's vipassana, insight, understanding into human nature, into one's thoughts. With karma, unfortunately, sometimes this can be very painful to take on board, but unfortunately karma is like a circle. It repeats itself over and over and over again. Even when I was young, I went through a stage, roughly 15 to early 20s. I basically wanted to commit suicide almost every second day. But it's not coming out of nowhere. It doesn't come out of the blue. This is because you tried to take your life, person tried to take your life previously, or there was an attempt. So essentially, the experience that one goes through, regardless of the person, the circumstances, you have to develop an understanding of what actually happens to you, because karma is so powerful and it controls karma and rebirth. You've got to have a kind of mindset where you're inside balance is at the same level. All the feelings that you go through, all the experiences you go through, all the close friends you have, one's children, one's partner, you have very, very tight karmic relationship connections with these key people in one's life, and these relationships are not going to stop. They're going to continue on and on and on, moving into the future, the next 10, 20, 100 lifetimes without end. This is why, especially in this kind of heavy situation, one has to teach oneself, one has to support the person that we've lost, the child, mum and dad, to the best of our ability, according to Buddhist culture. The Sri Lankan fraternity, the Thais, Burmese, they all have a very firm grounding in how to practice their life, and how to, the way they raise their children, the way they conduct themselves, the way they in general society, the way they relate to their friends. They already have a basic idea of how to live their life within the Buddhist framework. But that key principle is that karma repeats itself, for almost like indefinitely over time. So this is why wisdom has got to be well established. So even though with with the loss of one's child, close family member, you've got to understand what you're going through, because that link, until you actually attain the enlightenment stages, that link will not be broken, and you need to be the mind needs to be how can I explain it? It needs to be knowledgeable, to understand, to give and take, to be patient, to be compassionate, kind, because every single person you have, every significant person you have contact with in the course of one's life, you've got a very firm karmic connection which is going to endure over multiple lifetimes. So this is why we need to put ourselves in the best possible position to put our children, mum and dad. We have to not only protect yourself, but you have to protect the people around you, because they're so tightly connected with you. It's like your child. The experiences that your child goes through, affects you deeply and affects you personally. Mum and dad, the people who are close to you, you will feel their experience, and you'll be affected by their experience, their highs and lows, and everything that they can possibly go through. So this is why this whole karma, our life constantly teaches us, with the very, very heavy experiences, with the very light, garden variety experiences. But you have to essentially, you can connect with the monks and nuns and with good quality lay teachers, but in essence, 90% of the time, you have to teach yourself. Emotional intuitive intelligence needs to be well developed, because the more that you understand your personal relationships with the people around you, the more conducive and the more wholesome and the less difficult and the less potentially unfavorable karma that you get, between everyone gets, sometimes people get into moods and they run into trouble with people, this and that, but you've got to look at the big picture, in essence, that I've got a connection with this person. I've got to try to keep myself in a reasonably good state, because, you know, especially the monks who are very sensitive. Every move you make, every second of the day you're making karma. Some people underestimate the potential. They think they can do and say whatever they like in their day-to-day life, but if, you know, the vast majority of the population are not sensitive enough to see what happens. It might take a little bit of time. It might come back that day, it might come back next week. So this is why, in a nutshell, on this karmic relationship level, we have to protect ourselves, and we have to protect the people around us, because the power of that karma will not, you know, it essentially is going to persist. It's not going to stop for multiple, you know, 100, 200,000 lifetimes. You know, you're going to reconnect with one's children, mum and dad, multiple lifetimes. So this is why we have to make an effort to have good quality relationships with the people around us, because we're going to keep them and again, down through the process of karma and rebirth and moving. Essentially, as the Buddha said, there's no beginning point for this process of karma and rebirth. And if the wisdom inside is weak, and we don't attain to Dhamma at some point in the future, maybe for the later eternity, realistically, you may be playing, maybe even as a David being the vast majority of you, with the amount of paramita you've got, the vast majority of you will be born in David realms, and realistically, easily, without great difficulty, you know, you should be able to break through the Sotapanna level at least. You know, you've born hundreds of thousands of years in the David local realm. You should easily, even 1,000 Deva years, 2,000 Deva years, at least the first level, maybe even the third as an Anagami. And then once you've secured a very, very, very firm foothold when it comes to the enlightenment stages, there's no turning back. You're absolutely safe when it comes to karma and rebirth, and you're destined for, say, for full purity of mind at some point in the future. So, you know, with all of you, even if you think that because of the whole business complexity of modern life, but the monks basically finish the path to a major degree in your next life, and you just make sure the mind is well established. Even if you get taken, the monks, especially with us, you know, we've lost you've lost your son, but I can't think of my right words. But in essence, that, you know, wisdom and insight has got to be firmly established, because until we actually break through, until you actually break through to the enlightenment stage, that karma and rebirth will not come to an end. There's no beginning point. There's no an end point. It will go on into eternity. So this is the last words of the Buddha. You know, to strive on with diligence. The lay fraternity are very, very busy. They have a lot of responsibility, duties to deal with. But there's all sorts of, you know, little methods and tricks where you can meditate very, very lightly. You know, 16 hours a day. You can go a long. I know lots of little tricks. You can go a long, long way. But that key principle, if you arrive in the David local realm, make sure your mind's well established. You've got your underlying paramita. And the reality is that you could finish the path to a major degree in your next life.